All right, let's make this simple. Show me proof you're in this country legally.
And what authority do you have to ask me that while I'm filling up my
If you
car?
don't prove you're a citizen right now, you're going in
I'm a
cuffs.
citizen and a lieutenant with 11 years.
ICE agent Victor Hale saw Hannah Jordan, a black woman in her early 40s, pumping gas into her family minibus at an empty station and signaled his team, agents Lena Voss and Ryan Caldwell, to surround her the moment they confirmed she was completely alone with no witnesses around. The three agents demanded proof of citizenship, and when Lieutenant Jordan showed them her Texas driver's license and official police identification proving she was an 11-year veteran and supervising officer, they pretended to accept it and walk away while their body cameras captured them leaving. Then they deliberately turned off all three cameras before turning back and violently arresting Jordan while calling her racial slurs and telling her that her badge meant nothing because she was black. Jordan was driven to an ICE detention facility, stripped of her phone and belongings, and locked in a cell for 6 hours. What they didn't know was that Jordan's husband had tracked her phone and alerted her captain. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know if you enjoyed the story. Let's continue. Hannah Jordan had just finished loading the last of the sports equipment into the back of her Honda Odyssey minibus at the Riverside Athletic Complex. It was 3:45 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and she'd promised her husband Ethan and their two children, 14-year-old Jasmine and 10-year-old Isaiah, that she'd be home by 4 to help prepare for their family game night. At 42 years old, Jordan had been a police officer for 11 years, the last 3 as a lieutenant supervising a team of 9 officers in the city's West Precinct. She wore plain civilian clothes, today jeans, a navy blue t-shirt, and white sneakers, looking like any other mother running weekend errands. As she climbed into the driver's seat and checked her fuel gauge, the needle hovered just above empty. Jordan sighed. The Shell station was only 3 miles away on the route home, and stopping now would only add 5 minutes to her trip. She pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the gas station, unaware that 3 federal agents had just spotted her from across the street. Victor Hale sat in the driver's seat of an unmarked black SUV with government plates, watching the athletic complex parking lot with the calculated patience of a predator. At 38 years old, Hale had spent 9 years with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and in that time, he developed what he called an instinct for identifying undocumented immigrants. His 2 partners sat beside him, Lena Voss in the passenger seat and Ryan Caldwell in the back, both younger agents who'd learned to follow Hale's lead without question. When Hale saw Jordan loading children's gear into a newer minibus, something triggered in his mind. A black woman. Nice vehicle. Suburban neighborhood. Hale's jaw tightened as he watched Jordan drive away. The SUV's engine rumbled to life. Voss glanced at him, her eyebrow raised slightly. Hale said nothing, his gaze fixed on the taillights ahead. The minibus turned left onto Riverside Boulevard, maintaining the speed limit, signaling properly at each intersection. Hale kept 3 car lengths behind, professional and patient. When Jordan's minibus slowed and pulled into the Shell station on the corner of Riverside and 8th, Hale allowed a thin smile to cross his face. The lot was empty. No other vehicles at the pumps, no attendant visible through the convenience store window. Perfect. Jordan pulled up to pump number 4, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the concrete. She stepped out, credit card in hand, and began the familiar routine, swiping the card, selecting regular unleaded, lifting the nozzle. The SUV rolled to a stop 30 feet away, blocking the exit. 3 doors opened in near silence. Hale approached first, his boots steady on the pavement, his hand resting casually near his hip where his badge hung from a lanyard beneath his tactical vest. Voss moved to Jordan's right, Caldwell to her left, forming a triangle that tightened with each step. Jordan noticed them when the nozzle clicked into place in her tank. She turned, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to guarded awareness as she registered the ICE insignia on their vests. Hale stopped 6 feet away, his voice cutting through the afternoon silence with the demand for proof of legal status. Jordan's hand remained steady on the nozzle, but her posture straightened, the muscle memory of 11 years in uniform taking over even in civilian clothes. She questioned their authority, her voice calm but firm, each word measured. Voss stepped closer, her face impassive. Caldwell mirrored the movement on the opposite side. The triangle contracted. Jordan reached into her back pocket with deliberate slowness, producing her Texas driver's license. She extended it toward Hale, her fingers not trembling. Hale took it, examined the photograph, the name, the address in Houston, then passed it to Voss without comment. Voss studied it with theatrical skepticism, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Insufficient, Hale declared. Not proof of citizenship. The words hung in the empty lot like smoke. Jordan's jaw tightened fractionally. She reached into her other pocket, drawing out the leather case that held her police badge and identification card. Lieutenant Hannah Jordan, West Precinct. 11 years of service. She held it up, the gold shield catching the afternoon light. Hale's eyes flicked to Voss, then to Caldwell. Something passed between them, silent and understood. Hale took the badge, turned it over in his hands, then handed it back with a curt nod. The agents muttered acknowledgement of her credentials. Free to go. The words should have brought relief. Voss and Caldwell stepped back, their postures relaxing. Hale turned toward the SUV. Jordan exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and turned back to the pump. The nozzle was still dispensing fuel, the numbers climbing on the digital display. The agents walked away, 10 feet, 15. Then, in perfect synchronization, all three reached up to their chests. The small red lights on their body cameras, previously steady, flickered and died. The movement was practiced, rehearsed. Hale stopped walking. Voss and Caldwell stopped beside him. They turned as one. Hale's face had changed. The professional mask was gone, replaced by something raw and vicious. They charged back, boots pounding concrete. Voss reached Jordan first, grabbing her right arm and wrenching it behind her back. Caldwell seized the left. Jordan's voice rose in protest, citing her rights, her citizenship, her rank, but the words dissolved into the afternoon air, unheard or ignored. Hale produced handcuffs, the metal cold and unforgiving as he clamped them around Jordan's wrists, tightening them until they bit into skin. The slurs came next, vicious and deliberate. Hale's voice close to her ear, telling her that the badge meant nothing, that it couldn't protect her, that she was still just black. Jordan struggled, her training screaming at her to resist, but Voss and Caldwell were stronger together, their grips bruising. They dragged her away from the pump, the nozzle yanking free from the tank and clattering to the ground, gasoline spilling onto the concrete. Children's sports bags tumbled from the open rear door of the minibus. A soccer ball rolled across the lot. They shoved her into the back of the SUV, Caldwell climbing in beside her while Voss took the driver's seat and Hale settled into the passenger side. The engine roared. Jordan twisted in her seat, watching through the rear window as her minibus grew smaller, the pump still hanging loose, family items scattered like evidence of violence. Her mind raced calculations of time, of distance, of the children waiting at home expecting her by 4, of Ethan who would notice her absence, of the deliberate camera shutdown that proved intent. These agents had planned this. They had waited for isolation, for the absence of witnesses, for the moment when her authority would mean nothing against their coordinated will. The facility appeared after 20 minutes of silent driving through industrial corridors and back roads designed to disorient. A squat concrete building surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire, no signs indicating its purpose, no markings suggesting federal oversight. Hale pulled her from the vehicle, his grip on her upper arm tight enough to leave fingerprints. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in sickly white. An intake officer sat behind bulletproof glass, barely glancing up as Hale recited fabricated claims of immigration violations, of suspicious behavior, of failure to produce adequate documentation. Jordan's phone was taken, her badge was taken, her wallet, her keys, her watch, all confiscated and logged with clinical efficiency. She demanded a phone call, citing her rights under both civil and criminal procedure. The intake officer's expression remained blank, as if she hadn't spoken. She demanded verification of her identity, insisted they contact the West Precinct, gave Captain Elena Ramirez's direct line from memory. Silence. She was led down a narrow hallway, past other holding cells where faces pressed against small windows, eyes tracking her movement with the dull recognition of shared powerlessness. The cell door clanged shut behind her. 8 feet by 10 feet, a steel bench bolted to the wall, a toilet without a seat, concrete floor stained by decades of despair. Jordan sat on the bench, her wrists aching from the too tight cuffs that had only been removed once she was locked inside. Red marks circled both wrists like accusatory bracelets. She leaned back against the cold wall, her mind shifting from the immediate shock of assault to the methodical analysis her training demanded. But underneath the professional assessment ran another current one drawn not from her 11 years in uniform but from the 5 years she'd spent in secret, quietly earning a law degree through night classes and weekend study sessions while balancing motherhood and policing. She'd told almost no one, keeping the achievement private, viewing it as personal preparation for a future career shift she hadn't yet defined. Now, in this stark cell, that hidden knowledge became armor. She cataloged every violation, every procedural breach, every constitutional offense, the stop without probable cause, the demand for papers based solely on appearance, the acceptance and then reversal, the camera shutdown, the assault, the false imprisonment. Each element constructed a case in her mind, transforming her from victim to future advocate, from powerless detainee to underdog preparing her counterattack. Outside the cell, time moved differently. Guards changed shifts. Paperwork circulated. But inside, Jordan sat motionless, her professional poise masking internal vulnerability, her quiet strength underestimated by everyone who'd put her here because they'd seen only her appearance and dismissed her authority, her expertise, her humanity. The afternoon sun faded beyond the small window near the ceiling, and the holding cell grew dimmer. But Jordan's resolve only hardened, resilience building in the silence, preparing for the justice that would come not as spectacle, but as method. The hours accumulated in increments too small to measure, but too large to ignore. Jordan remained on the cold bench, her back against the wall, her wrists still marked by rings of pressure where the handcuffs had been clamped too tight. The holding cell offered no clock, no window large enough to track the sun's movement, only the fluorescent hum and the occasional echo of footsteps in distant corridors. She replayed the afternoon in methodical sequence, the approach, the demand, the false retreat, the synchronized camera shutdown, the assault. Each replay sharpened her analysis, her legal training transforming raw experience into documented evidence. She mentally drafted motions, anticipated defenses, identified precedents from cases she'd studied late at night while her family slept. The law degree she'd pursued in secret for 5 years, balancing motherhood and policing and a quiet ambition no one at the precinct knew about, now became the foundation for challenging every element of her detention. 17 miles away, in the modest 2-story house on Maple Ridge Drive, Ethan Jordan checked his watch for the 14th time in 30 minutes. 4:15, then 4:30, then 4:45. Hannah had promised to be home by 4. Game night started at 5, and Jasmine had already set up the board in the living room while Isaiah arranged snacks on the coffee table, both children oblivious to the growing tension in their father's posture. Ethan was an IT specialist for a mid-sized healthcare company, a man whose professional life revolved around systems, redundancies, and fail-safes. 2 years earlier, after a colleague's teenage daughter had gone missing for 6 hours during a hiking trip, Ethan had installed an advanced family location tracking app on every phone in the household, not out of paranoia, but out of the quiet conviction that preparation prevented panic. At 4:50, he opened the app. The screen loaded, displaying 4 icons representing 4 family members, 3 clustered together at the house. The 4th Hannah's sat stationary 17 miles southeast, pinned to an address Ethan didn't recognize. He refreshed the screen. The icon didn't move. He cross-referenced the address through a mapping service. The result sent ice through his chest. ICE Detention Facility, Clearwater Industrial Park. He refreshed again, ruling out GPS drift, ruling out app malfunction, his technical expertise confirming what his instincts rejected. His wife, a police lieutenant with 11 years of service, was being held at an immigration detention center. Ethan pulled up his contacts, scrolling past family and friends until he found the number Hannah had given him years ago with specific instructions. Only for emergencies. Captain Elena Ramirez, West Precinct. The call connected on the second ring. Ramirez had been sitting in her living room, halfway through a glass of wine and a documentary about migratory birds, when her phone buzzed. Ethan's voice came through urgent but controlled, delivering information in compressed bursts. Hannah's absence, the location data, the detention facility, the improbability bordering on impossibility. Ramirez listened without interrupting, her mind already assembling the pieces into a picture she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. A veteran lieutenant held on immigration grounds. The calculation took seconds. She set down the wine glass, grabbed her keys and uniform jacket, and headed for the door. The drive to the Clearwater facility took 23 minutes. Ramirez spent them running through scenarios, each more troubling than the last. By the time she pulled into the parking lot empty, except for 3 unmarked government vehicles, her expression had hardened into the mask she wore when politics and procedure collided. She walked through the front entrance in full uniform, her captain's insignia visible, her posture projecting authority that had been earned through 2 decades of navigating institutional resistance. The intake officer behind the bulletproof glass looked up without interest. Ramirez presented her identification and stated her purpose with clinical precision. She was there to retrieve Lieutenant Hannah Jordan, currently being held without cause, and she had location data proving Jordan's presence in this facility. The officer's expression remained blank, professional indifference, masking whatever instructions he'd been given. He checked his computer, scrolled through records, then looked back at Ramirez with manufactured confusion. No one by that name in the system. No record of any detention matching that description. Ramirez leaned closer to the glass, her voice dropping to a register that conveyed both threat and promise. She mentioned FBI oversight of detention facilities. She mentioned media scrutiny of federal misconduct. She mentioned her direct line to the regional director and her willingness to make calls that would trigger audits, investigations, and the kind of attention that ended careers. The officer's expression flickered. He made a phone call, voice low, eyes avoiding Ramirez's gaze. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Then the door beside the bulletproof window buzzed open. Jordan emerged, disheveled but unbroken, her clothes wrinkled, her hair loose from its usual tie, the red marks on her wrists visible even from a distance. Ramirez met her eyes and saw not defeat, but calculation, not trauma, but resolve. They walked to Ramirez's vehicle in silence. Only when the doors closed and the engine started did Jordan speak, recounting the stop, the slurs, the camera shutdown, the 6 hours of fabricated processing and deliberate isolation. Ramirez listened, her hands tight on the steering wheel. And somewhere in the middle of Jordan's methodical recitation, Jordan revealed the detail she'd kept private, even from most colleagues. The law degree earned over 5 years of night classes, the expertise that would now be weaponized against the system that had tried to erase her. The house on Maple Ridge Drive appeared in the headlights at 10:47. Ethan stood on the front porch, silhouetted against the interior light, his posture rigid with barely contained relief. Jordan stepped from the vehicle and walked into his arms, the embrace lasting longer than words could fill. Inside, Jasmine and Isaiah had fallen asleep on the couch, game pieces still scattered on the coffee table, their innocence, a stark contrast to the violence their mother had endured. Jordan knelt beside them, smoothing Isaiah's hair, adjusting the blanket over Jasmine's shoulders, her hands steady despite everything. Do you think a badge should shield everyone from bias? Or does skin color still trump authority? Drop yes if you agree change is needed, or share why in the comments below, and pass this story to a friend who needs to see it. Later, after the children had been carried to bed, Jordan and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light casting harsh shadows across both their faces. She recounted details she'd omitted in Ramirez's presence, the specific slurs, the deliberate coordination of the camera shutdown, the premeditation evident in every action. Ethan's jaw tightened with each revelation, his technical mind already constructing digital trails, metadata, location histories. Meanwhile, Ramirez had returned to her office, initiating an internal report that would trigger the first wave of investigation. The preliminary records revealed troubling patterns, 18 prior complaints filed against the 3 agents for racial profiling, all dismissed or buried under procedural technicalities. The gas station security footage arrived 2 days later, subpoenaed through channels Ramirez activated with surgical precision. Jordan watched it in Ramirez's office, her legal training sharpening every frame into evidence. The timestamp showed 3:48 in the afternoon. The camera angle captured everything: the approach, the triangle formation, the examination of credentials, the retreat, and then the chilling synchronization. All 3 agents reaching up simultaneously. Their body cameras' red lights extinguishing in perfect unison, followed by the violent reversal, the assault, the dragging. Premeditation documented in high definition. Jordan made notes in the margins of a legal pad, her handwriting small and precise, identifying each constitutional violation, each procedural breach, each element that would construct the lawsuit already forming in her mind. The transformation had begun from victim to advocate, from powerless detainee to underdog with hidden expertise, from someone the system had tried to erase to someone who would rewrite the rules. The security footage would go viral within weeks, viewed millions of times, But in that moment, in Ramirez's office with the video paused on the frame, showing 3 cameras going dark, Jordan saw not spectacle but method, not outrage but strategy, not the end of her humiliation but the beginning of systemic change. The civil rights attorney Jordan selected had spent 23 years litigating federal misconduct cases, building a reputation for methodical dismantling of institutional defenses. But when Jordan walked into his office 4 days after her detention and began outlining her case with the precision of someone who'd earned a law degree in secret over 5 years of night classes, the attorney recognized something rare, a client who could co-strategize rather than merely cooperate. They spent 11 hours across 3 sessions, constructing the federal lawsuit against Victor Hale, Lena Voss, Ryan Caldwell, and the government entity that had enabled them. The demand totaled $9.9 million, accompanied by a comprehensive probe into ICE detention practices statewide. The filing triggered immediate media attention, but more consequentially, it triggered subpoenas. The body camera footage arrived through court order 6 weeks into discovery. The agents had been required to upload all recordings from the day of Jordan's detention, and the files revealed exactly what the gas station security footage had shown. 3 cameras documenting the initial approach and credential examination, followed by a synchronized blackout at precisely 3:51 in the afternoon, followed by a gap of 17 minutes before the cameras reactivated during Jordan's transport to the facility. The deliberate erasure was irrefutable. But the investigation uncovered something deeper, something that transformed Jordan's case from personal grievance into evidence of systematic discrimination. The agent's personnel files, released under judicial order, contained 18 dismissed complaints spanning 4 years. Each complaint followed an identical pattern. Black or Latino professionals stopped in affluent neighborhoods, detained without probable cause, subjected to demands for documentation that white residents never faced. But buried within the digital records seized from Hale's work computer was something more damning, a spreadsheet titled Watch List, containing names, addresses, vehicle descriptions, and employment information for 43 black professionals living or working in suburban areas the agents patrolled. Jordan's name appeared in row 27, added 3 months before her detention. The list's existence turned individual racism into organized conspiracy, personal bias into unofficial agency policy. In federal court, 9 months after her detention, Jordan sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a tailored suit, her law degree no longer secret but strategic asset. During testimony, she assisted her attorney in real time, passing notes that identified procedural inconsistencies in ICE protocols, highlighting legal loopholes the defense attempted to exploit, citing precedents from cases she'd studied during those 5 years of quiet preparation. The judge noticed, the jury noticed, but more importantly, the viral security footage, now viewed 7.2 million times across social media platforms, had sparked public outrage that pressured the Department of Justice into expanding its scrutiny beyond 3 agents to the systemic failures that had enabled them. The consequences arrived in waves. Hale, Voss, and Caldwell were indicted on civil rights violations 3 months into the trial. Federal prosecutors built cases around false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law, and conspiracy to commit civil rights offenses. The agents were fired immediately, their credentials permanently revoked, their faces now associated with the kind of federal overreach that destroyed careers and reputations. Hale's divorce finalized 4 months later. Voss moved to a different state, taking work in private security at a fraction of her previous salary. Caldwell's employment applications, sent to dozens of law enforcement agencies, were rejected universally. Their lives unraveled in direct proportion to the harm they'd inflicted. The settlement came 12 months after Jordan's detention, awarded in a conference room rather than a courtroom, the government choosing to avoid further public trial. $9.9 million, the largest wrongful detention settlement in state history. But the money, while significant, mattered less than what followed. Nationwide reforms began rolling out within 16 months, mandated by consent decree and political pressure. Annual racial bias training became mandatory for all ICE agents. Probable cause requirements for immigration stops were codified into policy, ending the discretionary authority that had enabled profiling. Body camera policies were strengthened, with automatic disciplinary action for any deliberate deactivation during enforcement actions. Independent audits of detention facilities became routine, conducted quarterly by civilian oversight boards, with authority to recommend terminations and prosecutions. The initial audit, conducted by a commission empowered through Jordan's lawsuit, identified 52 agents across 6 states who exhibited similar patterns of discriminatory enforcement. 23 resigned before formal investigation. 17 faced disciplinary action. 12 were terminated. Jordan used the settlement funds to establish the Equity Defense Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal assistance to victims of racial profiling by law enforcement and federal agencies. The foundation's offices opened in a renovated building downtown, staffed by 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a case manager who'd experienced profiling herself. In its first 2 years, the foundation assisted over 150 individuals, securing settlements, expungements, and policy changes at local and state levels. Jordan transitioned her own career from policing to full-time civil rights law, leveraging both her law degree and her lived experience to dismantle the systems that had tried to erase her. She traveled nationally, speaking at law enforcement academies about accountability, at universities about systemic bias, at conferences about the intersection of race and authority. Her case became required reading in constitutional law classes, studied alongside landmark civil rights decisions as an example of how individual courage could force institutional reform. The surveillance footage from the gas station, once evidence of her humiliation, now served as teaching tool, the synchronized camera shutdown analyzed in training sessions as textbook premeditation. Years accumulated. Jasmine graduated high school, then college, choosing a career in public policy focused on criminal justice reform, citing her mother's experience as formative. Isaiah, now 16, volunteered at the Equity Defense Foundation on weekends, filing documents and learning the mechanics of advocacy. Ethan remained her anchor, his technical expertise continuing to support investigations that required digital forensics, location data analysis, metadata examination. Jordan herself accepted a promotion to a leadership role in community relations, a position created specifically to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities most affected by profiling and misconduct. She worked alongside Captain Ramirez, who'd been promoted to deputy chief, the 2 women forming an alliance that reshaped departmental culture from within. They implemented bias training, revised stop-and-search protocols, and created civilian review boards with actual authority rather than performative oversight. On a Saturday afternoon in late spring, 17 years after her detention, Jordan stood in the foundation's conference room. Looking at a wall covered with photographs, faces of people the foundation had helped, settlements secured, policies changed. Ethan stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Through the window, the city stretched out under clear sky, unaware of the quiet revolution that had begun at a gas station pump when 3 agents underestimated a woman they saw as powerless because they couldn't see past the color of her skin to the strength beneath. Her case was studied in law schools now, cited in briefs, referenced in judicial opinions. The Equity Defense Foundation had expanded to 3 cities, assisting over 400 individuals in its 7 years of operation. The reforms her lawsuit triggered had prevented countless future injustices, protecting people who would never know her name but benefited from her refusal to remain silent. Dignity, she'd learned, wasn't granted by badges or skin color. It was defended through courage, preparation, and the understanding that overlooked power, when finally recognized, could rewrite entire systems. The echoes of that fateful afternoon persisted, but they no longer carried only pain. They carried legacy, carried change, carried the proof that one person's stand against erasure could force a nation to see what it had long ignored. Justice, she'd discovered, wasn't spectacle. It was method, and she'd become its instrument, transforming humiliation into reform, victimhood into advocacy, silence into a voice that would speak for generations who came after, ensuring that pumping gas while black would never again be treated as grounds for detention, that authority would be recognized regardless of skin color, that hidden strength would rise when the system least expected it, and that truth, pursued with endurance, would always outlast the forces that sought to bury it.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.